and welcome to the Huddle Breakdown with me, Laura Bradburn. I am joined as always by, I was going to say my two favourite guys in the world. That might be a bit too high praise, but we'll go with my two favourite guys on this given Monday evening that we are recording, and that is still pretty good, I would say. James, how are you doing?
I'm good. That's the nicest thing a woman said to me in ages. So thank you.
Listen, take it where you can get it, I suppose.
That's exactly right.
Absolutely. As qualified as it is and as specific as it is, I'm with James. I'm old enough not to get many compliments these days, so I'll take it.
Well, how are you doing, Alan, anyway?
Yeah, all good. Pretty perky, thank you.
Good to know. It's a good night for a podcast, I would say. Listen, we were actually doing our little pre-setup, our pre-show setup meeting and kind of going, wonder what we're going to talk about this week, primarily because you've reliably informed me that the second half against Motherwell at the weekend was awful. I was otherwise engaged playing something called duck pin bowling. If anybody out there doesn't know what that is, don't ask me. I'm no the wiser for having played it, apart from the fact I know that you can get beer at the bar right next to it. So, but James, we'll come to you first on the Motherwell game.
Dundee United. Boy, how much did you have to drink at this game?
Oh my God!
How long was this game? Did it last a week?
Do you know now that you've said that? Actually, I was talking to my brother before the game started, and he jokingly said, I was with him at we were watching the Bayern game together, and I said, who's the game at the weekend? And he went, I don't know, probably one of the Dundee teams, because that's the way it seems to go at the moment. And I googled it and it did say Dundee United, so I don't know where Motherwell's come into my head. Thank you for correcting that. I am still,
no problem.
As a woman in her mid to, let's say, late 30s, 2-day hangovers are a very real thing, so I am still suffering from that, I have to say. But anyway, the Dundee United match at the weekend, James, how did you think that went?
For this, I've been a broken record, and we talked about it a little bit before we went live here about the consistency of just grinding through this time of the season, and how, I mean, if you think about it, we've had basically 2 games a week since, what was it, the third week of November when that international break concluded. So these guys have been flogged nonstop since then, and it's only human that you're gonna, you get up in a game like that, 2-0, and, you kind of downshift a little bit. I mentioned there's kind of the symmetry of last week with Bayern kind of playing similarly in the second half against us once they were up 2-0, or at least that's kind of how Alan and I think both felt that game went. So first half, great, nice, comfortable win. Second half, not the most thrilling entertainment product outside of a world-class finish from Ida on a tremendous goal. But yeah, I mean, again, at this time of the year, slogging through the schedule like we have, I looked ahead. I forget where somebody commented in the chat area on huddlebreakdown.com, and I think it's March 1st is the end. That's like the light at the end of the tunnel when we stop having 2 games a week. That's the last game in this like long train of flogging these poor guys. So yeah, after that we go back to more of a normal schedule, I think. Or I guess if it's all the time now with twice a week, that is the normal. So that the new normal. But so yeah, very, very good given all that has to be taken into account.
Yeah, Alan, as James says, we're reaching the end, thankfully, of a very, very involved and very long and arduous process in which we were averaging a game every 3 days. I guess when that's the case, regardless of whether they're particularly exciting results or not, getting a relatively comfortable win score-wise, at least, is all we can ask for at this point in the season, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, I don't want to sort of damn with faint praise, but I do think there is praise to be given for a couple of things, really. So we have called the club out, and Rodgers specifically, in terms of player injury profiles. And since the beginning of November, we've averaged 3.5 lineup changes per game. That's quite a lot. Sort of 2 to 2.5 would be kind of normal. in the league. So 3.5 is pretty, quite a lot of changes to line up, and we have had very few injuries, and it does seem that players are being managed in terms of their workloads. Apart from, I was surprised McGregor and Carter Vickers both played 90 minutes at the weekend, but I guess there's, especially Carter Vickers, there were options there, but. In the round, I think we've done a good job of managing the schedule. Now, because of that, because of the number of changes, you are going to get drop-offs and continuity, but also, as we've seen a lot of these games, when Celtic get a lead 2-0 up at half-time, I think Rodgers' experience, how the way he leads the team now, we're likely to just basically see the game out. I know we got 6 against Dundee, 5 against Wraith Rovers, what have you. But I think in general we have been managing games through, quite comfortably, and that's easy to say. But the relative XG against again was very low. So we let Dundee United. I say we let Dundee United elected to press a lot higher up the pitch. We've seen, and Celtic didn't really respond to that in terms of breaking on them very often, or didn't create a lot of counter transition type chances, but neither did they give up a lot of chances at their end either. So I think sometimes almost when not a lot happens, or where the game isn't very exciting, we tend to focus on that aspect and just kind of move along. But actually, I think there's some merit in the way that Celtic have played, because of the schedule, because of the workload, in just being able to manage their way through these games with a general lack of jeopardy is really what I'm trying to say in far too many words. And I think some credit is due to the team and to the manager for that as well. Put it this way, we'd soon be hearing about it if that wasn't happening. So I think when you see a game managed out like that, and in the end, like you said, Laura, a comfortable win and 3-goal advantage, overwhelming kind of XG differential again, over 1.5. We kind of taking that for granted now, but Dundee United are not a bad side. They're probably one of the better teams in the league. We know that Jim Goodwin will set up for a 0-0 to begin with, but he did, to be fair to him, he did change his tactics at half time. He did go a lot more aggressive because he knew that if he got 1 goal, then the game was really on for him. So he did go for it in that sense. He put a lot of risk in it for his team, because Celtic, if they fancied it, could have caused some carnage on the break. But so it's not like there wasn't a little bit of thought, and they weren't up against an opponent that did put a bit of thinking into the game. But yeah, I just think don't take for granted is what I'm saying. Celtic are still lost 1 league game all season, 3 draws. Could well, I think, get up to nearly 100 points in the league. That's not. I know we bemoan the lack of quality in the league, but again, when I come back to the just sheer volume of games, the number of minutes, and the different defensive problems that teams do put against Celtic, I think there is a little bit of credit due, really, just for managing through these games.
Yeah, I think it's. I've been doing my best to try and watch as much football from across the league as I can, even as little as they cover of the teams outside Celtic and Rangers. I have to say, I do think Dundee United and Dundee, who have played a fair bit recently, are 2 of the teams with some of the better players in the league. Even though, as we've all said at various points throughout the season, there are so many poor teams and poor players in this league, I do think they boast some of the better ones. Before I go back to James, Alan, the point you raised there about Dundee United playing a bit higher and pushing a bit higher, so often, especially at Celtic Park, we see teams camp in against us, drop deep, and very often Celtic do struggle to break that down. I know the result won't have necessarily informed any opinion that we could have on this, but what's your thoughts on teams maybe coming and having a little bit more of a go at Celtic? Is it something that you think opposition managers should be considering more, or is it, are you asking for a hiding if you do that?
I think we have seen teams do it. I mean, traditionally, and especially when Neil Lennon was manager, Hibernian tended to do that just to a greater extent, and often resulted in very entertaining matches. But they would often concede a lot of goals as well. So, but at Easter Road, it's probably the hardest away ground in the country for Celtic. Has been for a number of years now. So, I think there is some merit, but maybe not at Celtic Park. I think it would be very dangerous for these teams to kind of open up against Celtic. I think you might get a puncher's chance, right? You might land one, and then maybe if you sit back, you could see the game out if you were lucky. But I think it would be highly unlikely. I think the talent deficit is just so huge. And Celtic, although Celtic are a team that will break you down systemically because the team is very well organised. It has attacking patterns, and there's a certain consistency to the volume of shots and efforts and XG therefore created in a game per game basis. And maybe this is something I need to look at. And I'm especially thinking of if you think about the Rangers team, they are a team that very much rely on individual players doing something brilliant at a point in time. There's very little systemic attritional attacking like Celtic managed to produce. And the reason I say that is because Saturday was a little bit different. We did rely on 2 moments of magic in the first half to break down their low block. McGregor, danced past 4 players and a beautiful reverse shot into the corner. Jota's cut inside, and then lovely shot. He managed to do that perfect thing where you get it to dip just in front of the goalkeeper and bounce up just before it hits his hand. That never fails. That always results in a goal, nearly always. So that was good. So we did rely on moments of brilliance. But once you've got that kind of two goal lead, it's very, very hard for teams then. And I thought credit is good when he did kind of go for it a bit in the second half, and he didn't. It could have been on the end of a hiding, but I think, as I say, Celtic were happy not to overextend themselves in terms of effort, really, with the schedule to come.
Yeah, James, interested to hear your thoughts on that, because some of the points that Alan raised there about having a puncher's chance if you go with that approach against Celtic, and indeed the way in which we broke Dundee United down, having a few moments of brilliance. A couple of teams have come to Celtic Park or played us that way away and got that result through those individual moments. I know Hearts last season got a couple of good results against us. Some other teams have managed to break the deadlock in that way. I guess what I'm coming round to is away at Celtic Park for most of these teams a bit of a free hit, so you may as well sort of take your chances and see what you get out of it.
I think some managers have approached it that way. I think there's no right or wrong answer to this, and probably one of the more I wouldn't say alarming, but somewhat surprising conversations I've had this season was with Gareth heading into preview the Aston Villa game, because he's worked a little bit in the industry and talked about the degree to which teams lack any kind of opposition specific game planning, meaning that kind of coaches might tweak things around the edges, but generally they just do what they do. Like, this is how I play, this is how we set up, and watch this and watch that. But it's so foreign to me, based off of how I conceptualize sports. And so I think the answer is always it depends. It depends. Like, if we're looking in a perfect world, like how would I say a team should match up? And we'll get into this when we talk about previewing the game in Munich. Pending is it depends on what your relative strengths and weaknesses are. What's the available personnel? Who's going to be playing for the other team? How are they likely to address things? So the vast majority of the time, I think it's narrow, compact, and like medium block, then falling back into a deep block. One of the great, I still think, inefficiencies, and it really gets exposed at Celtic Park with the competitive dynamics in our league, is why you give a crap that a guy, doesn't matter if it's a fullback or a winger, has a ball near the touch line 40 yards from goal. Why you have 2 defenders out there that far out, when who cares if they cross the ball from there? Get a keeper that can secure a high cross, maybe that would help. But it just, there's teams that set up in ways that are just completely ridiculous. Like not compact at all, and they'll chase balls wide when we do. That was the crazy thing. I mean, in fairness to some of the teams, they started to adjust late in his first season and into the second season. This is back to Alan's point about the patterns of play. And I mean, what Ange ball was all about was wide overloads and sucking defenders out wide and then just carving them up with runs and then cut back crosses. I mean, it was like textbook. You saw it coming, and teams just kept doing it. It kept chasing those wide overloads. So, don't do that. Basically stay narrow and compact, and like I said, preferably as far away from your own goal as possible for as long as you can. And then when you have to bunker, then eventually you have to bunker. But again, I think depending on personnel, do you have the people that can actually high press? Do you actually high press competently? Like, just say you're going to high press, and then your triggers aren't good. Your reading of the opposition players, who's not great under certain circumstances and that kind of thing. That's why I've kind of joked about tongue in cheek a little bit about the Bruges script, is that they were so good at this kind of scouting, and like they basically in that first half wrote this book on how to make us look completely impotent, because they just basically set up this horrible way from our perspective that we're pushing on every single weak spot that we had to expose it, and it's just, again, to me, remarkable how little of that happens generally in the sport. But yeah, I would say at Celtic Park, defer to the narrow compact. Now, it's different, to Alan's point, when you get to some of these grounds that are narrower and smaller, they almost artificially create those conditions, and that's why I think we have more of an issue at Hibs. The plastic pitches that tend to be smaller and narrower, at Dundee United, where the dimensions almost mandate a narrowness and compactness. So yeah, they should probably replicate that as much as they can and just leave the flanks wide open, is kind of how I would look at it at Celtic Park.
See, just because we've mentioned Easter Road a couple of times, Alan, I'll ask you this. I don't know, but I remember when I was a kid, there was a big thing at Easter Road about who started running uphill in the first half and downhill in the second half, and you always heard about it. Have they levelled out the pitch or something like that? Because you never hear about it anymore. Or is it still a thing, do you know?
I honestly don't know. I have been to Easter Road when I was a kid a few times, and I don't remember. I didn't even remember noticing that, to be honest with you, at the time. So I don't know is the honest answer. So any of the viewers want to chip in with that, please let me know. I know Motherwell's ground is kind of like that, and it's got a big slope in it, isn't it? A bit from side to side, I think, or maybe corner to corner. I don't know, but yeah, Hibs' ground, is meant to be famous for that. But when just from the perspective of the TV, it looks like a pretty good ground, and not particularly small. I mean, Tynecastle is small, definitely by modern standards. I'm just trying to find, because I do believe it or not. Yeah, no, you do believe it because it's true, and it's actually quite predictable. I do note down the pitch dimensions for each match that I record. You listen. What did you expect me not to? And I'm just going to.
I'm not in the least bit surprised. I'm satisfied, wholly satisfied with that, Alan.
So as far as Tinternet is concerned, Easter Road pitch is the same size as Celtic Park. Now, how slopey it is, I don't know. And again, maybe our listeners can help us out on that.
No, I just have a very distinct recollection when I was younger of, oh no, we're running uphill in the first half. That's really going to tire us out for the second half. So I might be making it up, but somebody can let us know. James, I'll come back to you. Alan mentioned it just before about I think it was, you said roughly 2.5 changes per game.
3.5.
3.5. It was normally less than that, but it's 3.5. I remember distinctly in October/November, you and I, we were recording a show, and simultaneously we were scrolling through the fixtures to see what what it was going to look like, and to our horror, simultaneously again realised that it was a game every 3 days from then until the start of March. And at that point, we were worried about how we would use the squad and how we would keep fitness up and how we would manage to rotate. Given what Alan said about the number of changes to the team, do you think we've done about as well as we can do in terms of keeping players fit, keeping them match fit, but also keeping that freshness available for games, given the volume that we've played over the last couple of months?
I think everyone involved, and again, who knows how much of it's active decisions. So let's hope so. I think given how good it's been, it's likely that there's been, and there's evidence because of what Alan said relative to the rotations. And it's not just rotations, it's the amount of substitutions that's going on earlier in game substitutions. So I'll challenge Alan. He might not have this handy, but my guess is that the average times of substitutions have come down a little bit this season relative to like Ange's 2 seasons, where we had a lot more, I think, in like the 70th minute, maybe. I'm making that up as we go.
I don't have that, but I do have another one. Go, so I'll ask you a question, see if you can guess the answer. How many players in the squad have played over 1,000 minutes so far?
Oh boy. Well, I would say 17.
Laura,
I'm going to go lower than that. What's my guess? Because I think maybe the implication is that not many of them do a full 90 at any one time. So I'm going to say 9.
No, it is. James wasn't far off. It's 16. So only 16 players. Only 16 players have played over 1,000 minutes. Now, there's a few that are close. Yang, Forrest, Ralston are not too far away. So you could make a case, but I guess the point I'm trying to make here is we're back to. I still don't think we're, for all that. I think you're right. We're making earlier substitutions, and we're maybe rotating the squad a little bit better. It still feels like we've not moved much beyond. Ange had 17 that he relied on. Rodgers last season had 17. When it came down to it, when it all was said and done, there was generally 17 players that were trusted to get the job done. And I don't think we're that much better off now. So it just kind of highlights to me that although accepting as well that we're maybe better at managing the squad, we are still in the same place in terms of probably having probably 2 or 3 too few really to share that workload.
And I agree with that. I think that one of my criticisms of Ange was that, because we talked about this, I mean, the amount that Turnbull and Rogic were flogged in the first 4 months of his arrival was remarkable, actually. And so going through an analogous period of, twice a week, and
bearing in mind both of their injury histories as well.
Well, not only that, but them being asked to play attacking eights in that, which kind of a crazy aggressive physical system. And this is why because I agree with Alan on the depth side, but that's why I think there's even more credence and applause to be had as far as the lack of injuries, because you get on the sliding dial of temptation. When the quality depth isn't there, then you're more likely to rotate less, and you're more likely to stick with guys more than maybe you'd otherwise should, and run that risk or elevated risk of soft tissue injuries in particular. And that's where, I mean, if you look at all kinds of teams, I mean, most famously right now with Ange at Tottenham, but Arsenal, you go right down the list of teams that play kind of a front-footed, aggressive, pressing and counter-pressing style that have had significant soft tissue injuries. It's become an epidemic because of how much these players are getting flogged with the calendar getting so congested between the international and club requirements. So the fact that within that kind of broader ecosystem, and the fact that we're still in that kind of 17, 18 maybe trusted players, I mean, I think it's tremendous that we haven't had really any meaningful. I'm probably good at jinxing because we still have till March 1st, but and these things can be cumulative. But the fact that we haven't had more soft tissue injuries, and I think that is an underappreciated aspect of everyone. I shouldn't say everyone, but a lot of people are saying how much better we are this season than last season. Europe's so much better. And I'm like, you know what? Actually, I think the 2 seasons were pretty similar. We just were healthy this season. Right. And if you think about, we talked about this last season about how close some of those games were until we got guys sent off for, with Scales at left or at center back against Feyenoord, and, all of these things that we went in. I was like, man, we had really great shape. We were really in that game. And then everything kind of fell apart because we had like half a squad because there were so many people out injured, or we had no center backs for like 3 months. So I think that the health of the team has been hugely important, and I do. I mean, barring some other kind of evidence that becomes knowable, I suspect it's been a strategic decision that they've made, or a series of strategic decisions in order to manage these risks. And because we did know, I mean, there was a report, and this is part of why I was so critical of Ange, is that the club going into his first season had invested in software to help model soft tissue injury risk, and then had a horrible stretch of soft tissue injuries. So maybe they're using it now, which again, that's a lot of clubs that have used it have seen like 70, 80% decline in their injury rate. And, we should applaud when they're doing something really smart. So hopefully that's what's been going on.
Alan, James brings up a good point there. I mean, I sit here as the kind of less statistically focused fan who forms my opinions based on how 90% of fans form their opinions, which is in how I feel when I watch it, what I think I see when I watch it. And you guys quite often pull out statistics that, fingers crossed, back up what I've said, but very often present the opposite. It's encouraging, I think, if, as James suggests, perhaps we are using that statistical side, the analytical side, the software side, to actually try and mitigate this risk. Because I think, like we all know, throughout history, it's been a badge of honour for players to just shake something off or play through the pain or do that kind of thing. But with the demands on them nowadays, and with the style of play that they're being asked to play, you just can't continue to do that without them breaking down.
No, and a good case study for this, as I say, is Arne Engels. I mean, he's playing for a relegation-threatened German Bundesliga side. So so they play 34 matches in the league, and they weren't in Europe, and they have one cup. So they get knocked out of the cup in the third round or whatever, the first round that they play in. He's looking at 35 games. That's it, and he didn't play in any of them. He didn't in all of them. Right? He might start 5 or 6, and he might be on the bench for whatever. So you come into this, it's like you're playing every 3 days. That's quite a difference. And even a young, strong body, as I'm sure he has, would take some adjustment to that. I don't have any information as to whether they are using the software that James alludes to, but I would like to think they are. And certainly, given the nature of how Celtic play with a high pressing style, as I said, Celtic are one of the most effective pressing teams in the Champions League. I'm not saying they're one of the best teams in the Champions League. I'm not saying that. I'm saying in the aspect of an organised press with a reasonable degree of effectiveness, Celtic are one of the top pressing teams in the Champions League. Now, that does take not just physical effort, in terms of, obviously, you're sprinting to close players down quickly. It takes a lot of mental effort because you're making a lot of decisions. And, it's not just decisions on the ball, you're making a lot of decisions off the ball. So both mentally and physically, it's a draining way to play. And as we've seen at Tottenham, where, frankly, I think Postecoglou is an inflexible coach. Their injury profile is off the chart, even in relation to the Premier League, which is renowned for being a physical, fast league. Tottenham's injury situation is way at the top right compared to and I think that builds up. And we saw that with Rodgers' teams. Rodgers' teams, when he was a younger coach, it was an attritional injury profile that actually grew as time went on, because these things, people's bodies, things don't necessarily manifest immediately. It is, a lot of these things are, as I say, attritional. So I think it has been good. What would be interested to see is how it is next season. We've had a good Champions League campaign. In all likelihood, it will probably end tomorrow night, but here's hoping not. And then we could have a game every 3 days in September, March, as well, if we get through to the next round. But it'll be interesting to see if there is a drop off. My prediction would be, in all likelihood, we'll probably not get through tomorrow night. I think it's an incredibly tough ask. But I think once the team are down to one game a week, I think we'll start to see more kind of expansive, really attacking, pedal to the metal type football that we saw in the early stages of the season. And I think Celtic will go to the title, cross the line. They'll sprint past the line, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say. So that's what I think will happen. And because I think Rodgers has been very actively managing us through these games so far.
Yeah, just thinking about Ange and his problems at Tottenham, I've always said that when you end up having what you think is a really unfortunate run of injuries, you have to start looking at whether it is actually fortune or whether it's something that's been done internally. And I would suspect in Ange's case it is the latter. I'm a big disciple of Ange and everything that he does, but as you said there, he is an inflexible coach, and while that might have been admirable somewhere like Celtic, it's certainly being shown for the limitations it has at Tottenham, but that could be a whole other podcast. James, Alan talked Bundesliga there, he talked Champions League. It was as if he was setting up my transition into the next section of the podcast, so I'll come to you first on it. We obviously have the second leg of our I keep going to say last 16. It's a knockout tie, but it's not last 16 yet. It's the first knockout round of the Champions League, and we're obviously playing the second leg against Bayern Munich. Given that we've covered, obviously, our thoughts on the first leg and how much we admired exactly what Celtic did, given that we're away from home for the second leg and given that we're in the position that we're in, how would you go about giving us a fighting chance of coming out with a positive result tomorrow night?
Yeah, so I think, there's only one positive result that matters, other than, and we don't want to fall victim to the not the moral authority, but the feel good cup, right? And we come out of there with a draw and we go home with only, let's say
one of Philip Clement's trophies, if we
that's what I was going to say.
We won the shots at goal trophy, for example, because we won the XG Cup last Wednesday.
That's right. We joked about that. Yeah. So great, we got a 0-0 draw at Munich, and so I'm kind of a competitive person. So to me, I don't know if this is a saying. It's like kissing your sister, right? Ugh. That's no good. So that's sports.
Americans are so weird.
Yeah, that's why we hate ties over here. It's like kissing your sister.
Why would you even think of that as a thing?
Yeah. Well, but
it's maybe more common in some parts of America than others.
That's right. Depends on what region you're in. But
Pennsylvania gets quite rural, Laura. I know you think when you think Pennsylvania, you think Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, but a lot of it's very rural and there's not a lot to do.
It's true. That is true. Kissing cousins, that's another thing. But anyway, we don't want to go down this rabbit hole. So the only result that really matters is a win, and hopefully push it to extra time, and then maybe get the penalties or something. I think that's the idea that we're going to win by 2 goals. I think, all right, you're starting to talk stupid talk, but how do you come up with that? And I think realistically, kind of like the conversation we just had about opposition coming to Celtic Park, I don't think you go into the Allianz and say we're going to have a go against this Bayern Munich team. They are really good at home. They're one of the best teams in the world. They have incredible attacking talent. They completely overwhelm us with physicality and athleticism on a relative basis. So I think that would be kind of nuts. So to me, it's set up defensive and try to hit them on the break. We've talked about this over and over. How are we going to be able to do that? I think it has to be over the top. We are not good enough through the middle. We are not good enough. We don't have a hold-up striker that's going to be able to, secure the ball against their level of player and bring us on and then move the ball up the pitch from around the midway line. So I think we have to absorb their pressure, set up defensively, and try to hit our 2 super fast dudes over the top. As cynical and terrible and throwback as that is, that's the best way for us to have a shot. And it's probably still not a good shot. It's still probably like a 1 in 10 type of shot at best, but I think that's the best one. So with that in mind, again, I don't think it's another one. I don't know, guys, you have this. You can't be a little bit pregnant, right? So I don't think you can go a little bit defensive. So I think relative to if you're going to go defensive,
he's talking kissing sisters and then pregnancy. I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah,
it's chaos.
It's chaos. So really a bit weird, isn't it?
Hey, when you're going to the Allianz at Celtic and you need a win, you got to pull out all the stops, all the worst analogies possible. And so I think you have to go fully defensive. And I think what does that mean? I think something is radical. This is kind of my radical conception. I have no expectation that something like this is going to happen. But Scales at left back, Schlupp in midfield, Yang at left wing, Maeda, and because we're going to defend it 4-4-2, and if we're going to, they're probably going to have 80% of the ball, something like that, 75, 80% of the ball. So we're going to be in a lot of 4-4-2, or we're going to be in a lot of like kind of 4-5-1 is how it'll probably play out. So Kuhn and Maeda is just kind of your top two to hit them on the break over the top, and then you have Schlupp, McGregor, and Engels as your kind of midfield guys that can launch those balls. We've already seen Schlupp's a talented left footer that can do that. We know Engels can do that from deep. That's one of his strengths. And you have the size and the relative athleticism of Scales over Taylor to help protect the box with the shelling of crosses that would likely occur if we're going to play this way. And also on set pieces, which we've seen, we were a little deficient, or at least we were in this against this level of opponent last week. So that's like my radical. And why Yang? Well, because Yang can move the ball up the pitch a little bit, and he's got the athleticism to defend maybe a little bit. So that's like my, going completely outside the box radicalism in concept, because I think that's the degree that we need to go in this kind of situation where it's just a brutally difficult proposition that we're walking into here. So that's that's my honest assessment of like what would be our best chance.
Yeah, Alan, when I was watching the game last week, there was a couple of things that sort of sprung to mind. As much as I think James is entirely right, we need to go over the top and release the pace of the players that we have that pace. I was surprised with some of the amount of space and time we got on the ball in the middle of the park. Now, I don't know whether that was just Bayern trying to invite us into a trap, so to speak, but I presume it will be different, obviously, at the Allianz Arena. Do you agree in the main with what James is saying in terms of how you would approach it? Is there anything you would add to that in terms of how we can basically stay in the tie as long as possible?
I like it actually. I was kind of nodding along because I thought it all makes sense in theory, right? But it's yeah. Listen, we're still in the tie, right? And I think what we saw last week was there was a little bit of hope as I talked about before that game, and I think there's still a little bit of hope. Based on what we saw last week, because I think they'll come out at a million miles an hour again, and because what they'll be looking to do is score a goal, if not two, early on, and kill the tie, and then they'll just coast through to the next round. That's what they want to do, and they'll believe that there's sufficient talent deficit at our end for them to be able to do that. They've just come off the back of a really tense, difficult encounter in Leverkusen, which people were fixated about the fact they didn't have a shot at goal until the 70-something minute and had 0.05 xG or what have you. That point, right, that they won against Leverkusen almost guarantees they're going to win the league this season. Leverkusen had to win that game, and they kept a very talented team out. They got the point, and it's now, based on the number of points they are ahead and the number of games left, it's going to be very difficult for anyone to kind of claw them back. So for as much as it was an ugly performance and there was very little in the attacking sense, it was an incredibly effective outcome for them and a very positive outcome for them. So they've actually had a good week. They've won away in the Champions League knockout. Yes, and they started well, and probably their performance tailed off at Celtic Park. How much of that was down to tiredness? I mean, Joshua Kimmich was quite critical about his own team he actually said that they lost control of the game after the 55th minute, which I thought was surprising, because I think our sort of pessimism was that they basically just felt they'd done enough and were kind of just playing with the slippers on type of thing. But there may be an element they actually did tire, and Celtic did worry them, and I think that's true. I think Celtic did create chances in that last 10 minutes. In fact, last 10 minutes I was hopeful that we might get another goal. So Celtic did really well in that first half. That sort of 4-4-2, what became a low block, was actually really effective. They did shell the box with crosses. Having Scales in there isn't a bad idea. Taylor against Oliseh is a complete mismatch in all regards. It was actually Paul John Dykes on the WhatsApp group that suggested that Schlupp play anyway, because Schlupp's played with Oliseh for years at Palace and knows him really well. So he wouldn't have that sort of fear, and obviously wouldn't be overmatched physically either, particularly. So that's not a bad shout as well. So, but the 4-4-2 block was effective. After the 15th minute, as I said, they pretty much ran out of ideas. So they didn't create anything. It was pretty good from Celtic in that sense. But where we were really poor was on the ball, and we couldn't make the connections to get those breakaways that James is talking about. That's where we've got to be better. We've got to be as good in terms of the defensive resilience, concentration, compactness, shape, all that, but we've got to be better on the ball. You've got to be perfect to win there. They're almost unbeatable in their own pitch, and they will absolutely go for it. But there is hope there, and then they can get a bit ragged. I mean, they're flair players, of which they've got a host of them in the forward areas, can get a bit individualistic. Even Harry Kane, when I've seen this with England, it's a real problem. When things aren't going well, Harry Kane just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. He just drops further and further back to get the ball, and you sort of think, if you're shelling the box with crosses and your centre forwards kind of out on the right hand side of midfield, that's no good. So they can get a little bit indisciplined in that respect, and the defence is not like the strongest part of their team. We've talked about Neuer is definitely on the fast downslope of his capabilities. Kim came back into centre defence against Leverkusen. He'd definitely be an upgrade on Eric Dyer for sure. So that would be a blow for Celtic. But it's not the best defence they've ever had. So there is a little bit of hope there. I'm not overstating this. As I say, we don't have a lot of chance, but I think a template of low block again, but just be better on the ball. Because there's only one goal in it. We just need to stay in the game. We don't have to score a goal in the first 10 minutes. We have to score a goal in the first 60 minutes. We just need to stay in the game, because I think they will get frustrated if it's 0-0 going beyond the 60th minute and they haven't killed the game off. Then there's going to be a little bit of frustration there, and a little bit of unease will creep in. So we just need to stay in it, and that just means resilience, focus, concentration, shape, and all those things are going to be paramount in the performance. And as I say, all I ask for is just to be that little bit better on the ball.
I thought you were going to verge on the more. You've got to want it more. That's what you've got to want it more, Alan.
That was going to be the next thing. If I had to keep talking, that'd be my next thing to pull off the list. Yeah,
that'll be the only thing that Alan and I disagree on then, because I don't even think we should pretend that we're going to be good enough on the ball and just shell that shit right down the field. Don't even pull an ollie against against Foreman and just rope-a-dope it. Absorb the pressure, shell it. If 3 or 4 of them turn into decent chances of Maeda and Kuhn running onto it, because I'm
thinking at home they'll play really high, right? Like really,
well, that's right.
Really high.
It's going to be crazy. They might be Maeda versus Neuer 1-on-1, like 50 yards from their goal. Like that could happen. And yeah, so that's my expectation, is that they will be crazy forward. And I just, to me, the recipe here is de-risk inside of our defensive third. And I mean, anytime we're on the ball, we're a split second away from a horrible mistake that's going to gift them a goal. And that's the thing we can't do. I don't think we can delude ourselves into the expectation that in the Allianz, we're not going to have at least, if we try to play the Celtic way to build out from the back, there's going to be a material error rate in these circumstances, is my expectation and fear. and that's going to turn into at least 1 to 2 like crazy goal opportunities, which again, with these guys, that's you're almost guaranteeing you're giving them 1 or 2 goals at least. And then it's like, okay, well then it's over. Right. So that's why when I'm talking about optimizate, like I know this is what it's so antithetical to anything that we ever do. This is why I don't expect it to happen. But that's why I do think it's the best way to go, because we have to completely de-risk in that way.
Do you know, the only thing I would say to add to each of these great points that you've both made, if there's any players or any coaching staff listening, the one thing I would ask is, don't leave Harry Kane unmarked on a corner. I mean, that seems pretty basic. I would say so, but hopefully they've learned their lesson from that. Alan, I guess the question I've got to ask is, James talks about his preferred method of playing the game tomorrow night being antithetical to anything we normally do. I know I'm asking you an impossible question here. Does Brendan have it within him to kind of throw his own rule book out the window and play exactly the way we need to play to get through the game, or will he be too invested, like some other managers we've had before, in maintaining a certain style, even if it means going out with glory, if that's the way you want to put it?
I think he will. I think he will have that pragmatism, or if you want to call it pragmatism. But I think that I think this is in this most difficult of matches is where I think we'll see the more thoughtful Brendan around his tactical his tactical arsenal, if you like. This was what we were expecting when he came back. This is what they saw at Leicester City. Leicester got to, albeit I think it was the Conference League, but they'd never been to a European semi-final before. They got there under Rodgers. They won the FA Cup, playing a very counter-attacking game against Chelsea in the final, and they got to top 6, top 7 finishes in the English Premier League year on year, matching the top teams in that division on occasion, and sometimes producing spectacular performances, none more so than beating Man City 5-2. It probably peak Guardiola, in terms of the peak of his powers with that club. So I think I'm expecting to see that Brendan tomorrow, I hope, because whereas Brendan will think he can go to Ibrox against that group of players and just play the way we normally play and win. I think that's his expectation. And actually, I don't disagree with him. I think we should be able to do that. And we did. I think one of the interesting games, and I know that James could say, well, we didn't break down Bruges, we didn't work that out, and I think that's fair, absolutely fair. But I don't think we should underestimate how good a side Bruges were, by the way. Just think back to that, Zagreb game, and where they were determined not to lose, and we kind of didn't force it, when a win would almost have taken us through. But it turned out to be a good point for us, not a good point for them. So who kind of got the better of that tactical battle? Atalanta, yeah, we kind of rode our luck a bit, but I'm not sure we've got enough players where you can. So I think we did get the 0-0 draw there. I thought last week was good. I thought it was very good, actually. They grew into the game and actually produced plenty of threat. But what was most impressed with was that 30 minutes in the second half when we really didn't let them near goal. We didn't, anytime they got near goal, they were offside. So we were incredibly disciplined, and even the offsides are indicative of concentration, of timing, of everyone, communication, and all that. So I think we will see a different side to Celtic. We have to, because as James says, if we try and play our normal game, we'll get absolutely ripped to shreds. So we have to do something quite different. Last week was, when did the last time you see Celtic string eight players across the 18-yard line? I mean, we just never see that, do we? So that was different, and it was kind of effective to a point. I get the point about just shelling it forward. It's not quite as simple as that, but you do need that little bit of quality on the ball. You might need 1 or 2 passes just to establish the right position to then make that move and that run. But we're nitpicking. So I think we'll see. Mature older Brendan tomorrow set up his team smartly. That's what I'm hoping anyway.
James, I'll close out the show, this week's show, in advance of tomorrow. Alan provided quite a nice wee summary there of some of the ups and downs of our Champions League run. assuming, although hopefully not, it does end tomorrow. I guess my question for you, kind of around the same theme, is do you think you've seen an improvement in our general maturity levels in Europe, Borussia Dortmund aside, in terms of how we've handled the campaign and how we have seemed to, like we were saying about Zagreb and things, get points and be aware of the wider context of exactly how to manage ourselves to try and maximise our potential in the competition?
Yeah, I think we marginally overperformed in that sense, and I say to that relative to what I thought was a reasonable expectation on Brendan going into it, meaning that based off of his post-Celtic period at Leicester, his rhetoric going in, got a little dicey after the Dortmund game when he went off on one of his divergence from that for whatever reason. We could speculate, and we did at the time, and hope that he wasn't going off the rails. He certainly didn't. I think he's been brilliant. I think the game plans have been generally pretty good given the tools that he's got at his disposal. But I do think it's on the margins, meaning that, pre-tournament expectations were kind of around 24th, 23rd, right there to qualify. We outperformed that a little bit. You're going to have, I wrote something about this at the time when the league phase ended. We were one of the largest benefactors of uncontrollable variance in the league phase. What's that? Well, how does opposition keepers play? How do opponents, how is their finishing on a relative basis? So we did benefit a little bit on that from that perspective. So yeah, again, back to something that Alan says, it's not a time to be churlish. I think, credit is warranted to get, just to do what you're supposed to is way better than anything that Celtic's done in Europe for how long, right?
That's true.
So that's incredibly positive. And then to outperform even that a little bit, I think is hugely positive. It's just, I don't think we should be going off the rails and characterizing it as some massive step forward that then creates, misattribution and complacency as we look forward to a qualifier next summer already. That's probably going to be hairy by definition to try and get back into this thing. So I think we need kind of as accurate as we can be as far as attributing the positives and negatives. So definitely on the positive side, but let's not get too carried away about it.
And do you remember who you're talking to? Let's not get too carried away. That's
all I know. We never get carried away.
Yeah, I was going to say, what do you think I'm here for? Honest to goodness. Alan, why don't you update the listeners and the viewers a little bit on what they can find on huddlebreakdown.com, either what's been recently uploaded, what they can expect later in the week?
So if you've been intrigued by Callum McGregor's 8-goal season, incredible, then and you want to read more about what's actually happening under the covers, how it compares to previous seasons, is this what we should be expecting? Then there's a piece on that. James has done another piece today, which, because I've been capturing the data, I'll admit I've not read yet, so I'll let James talk about that one. What's on there today?
Yeah, it's the third in a series of kind of revisiting Celtic from a strategic perspective. First was the transfer window closing and revisiting player trading benchmarking amongst our peer group. And then the second one late last week was looking at how we could inform our perspective in Glasgow of Celtic versus Rangers by looking at Red Star and Partizan, and how the impact of European money is really the big difference, the differentiator that creates a financial gap. And the one that just went out today is exploring the potential. That's the key word, potential, for Celtic's biggest competitive threat over the next few years being from Hearts, and how important it is not to underestimate the impact if Tony Bloom is in fact going in there. And so I take a pretty good look, a deep look at Union Saint-Gilloise in Belgium, and the really remarkable impact that Bloom's team had in taking that club over, and what they've been able to accomplish in what I would argue is a more challenging. I didn't say it like at the top end, but from top to bottom, a more difficult league to do that in, coming from where they were coming versus where Hearts kind of sits right now within the Scottish League context. So.
So, I mean, just really the major point here is like, this podcast, Huddle Breakdown, we did it for years, generally one a week, and it's still free to air for everybody. And that was very important for us to do that. James and I are now doing a lot more written work, a lot more articles, and we've got another additional podcast on a Thursday, which we call Extra Time, which we tend to get into probably more detail, probably go on for a bit longer, often running to an hour and a half, etc., getting right into the detail. And so all that extra stuff is what's open to subscribers, really. So if you do like this stuff and you want more of it, and you really enjoy the more analytical side of the game, then there's a ton more content on huddlebreakdown.com. And, please be great to have you along. We've got a really, really good active community of people that are pretty passionate about this stuff. And it's great fun. Match days are good fun in terms of the chats and what have you. All the articles get a lot of good comments and questions. We do have sessions with subscribers, Q&As and so forth, and all that good stuff. So there's a real sense of community. So please do come along, or even you can if you want to give the subscription to somebody else, then please do that as well. That's something that you can do also. So good to have you along still. Glad you're still with us. But as I say, there's a lot more there if you want it.
Yeah, there's still time for a wee late Valentine's Day present if you missed it. A wee subscription to the Huddle Breakdown is the most romantic thing I can think of giving somebody, that's for sure. So, James, if you're looking for something for your sister, then obviously.
Maybe, or my cousin, or both.
Or your cousin, yeah. They're the same person.
You know what? In certain parts of Pennsylvania, that's not as uncommon as you might think, Alan.
Anyway, thanks very much, guys. I think we'll finish it there, and we'll see you all next week.